it. All right. Well, I want to thank you all. Those who are still sticking with us, we appreciate it. We really, really appreciate it. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole, and I'll be moderating this conversation on preparing the next generation of talent. So we're fortunate to have some amazing panelists here who are speaking from the media brand side, but then also from the HBCU side, just to talk a little bit more about what we all can do to ensure that students and just the community in general has access to the resources they need to be successful. But then beyond that, asking just a few challenging questions, not too challenging, just a little bit. But with that being said, I would love just to have everyone introduce themselves. So Jeff, I'm gonna start with you again because I see you first here, but Jeff, do you mind going ahead and introducing yourself to the audience?
Yes, sure. So my name is Jeff Marshall. I am the Chief Diversity Officer, Head of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging at Worldwide. We are one of Media Brand's largest media full-service agencies. And so I used to work prior to being in the diversity space on the business side of the table, doing media planning, strategy, and buying for clients over a 22-year career.
Thank you for that. Next, we have Dr. Stevenson.
Yes, Dr. Marshall Stevenson. I'm Dean of Education, Social Sciences, and the Arts at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Prior to that, I was a dean at Delaware State University, another land grant HBCU. And prior to that, I was at Nicole's alma mater as dean at Dillard University in New Orleans.
I love it. Thank you so much just for being here as well. Next, we have Dr. Dennis Johnson, who serves as our Senior Vice President of Programs and Partnerships at HBCU 20 by 20. You mind going? I guess I introduced you before you, but
yeah, it's cool. You stole my thunder, but just to add to that, I'll say the cool thing about being on this panel is I honestly feel like I work in between, Jeff and Dr. Stevenson in reference to building that relationship. But thank you all. Yes, I am Dr. Dennis Johnson, the Senior Vice President of Programs and Partnerships at HBCU 20 by 20.
Thank you. And we'll be joined shortly by Mary Watson, as well as Dr. Wes Bellamy. But in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and dive right into questions. So my first question for everyone is, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important in the 21st century workforce, and what role does HBCUs play in that? So I can start with Dr. Stevenson.
Okay. Well, we live in a global world, and it's important for our students at HBCUs to be able to compete against anyone and anyone from any institution in the world, not just the United States. And I think in the last 20, 30 years, HBCUs have opened up from being more kind of domestic focused and looking at what's happening in the United States to understanding that we are a global society, and it's important through study abroad, through learning languages, those kinds of curriculum infused things to be able to really become global citizens. And I think HBCUs have done a good job at that. We certainly could do a better job at that. COVID has kind of put a little damper on that, but I think we're moving beyond learning how to adjust with COVID and getting back out in a specific global space.
Thank you for that. I think that when we think about like the even the concept of globalization and what roles we all play in working to create a more equitable workforce, seeing HBCUs honestly kind of, I don't want to say lead the forefront, but really dive in and become a part of that process is important. I think I'll kick it over to Jeff next. So same question, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important in the 21st century?
You know, not to, I mean, if we're being completely honest, right, it's been important in every century, but the reason, it wasn't paid attention to as much as it should have been. The reason it's important right now, and I'm going to speak obviously from an agency perspective, the work we do is about reaching consumers, right? And so it's really important for us to be able to connect with consumers. That like, and now beyond it just being important for us, that's literally what consumers, like people who want to purchase products or use services, that's what they expect from the brands and the companies that they are going to patronize. And so in order for us to do our job as an agency and do it effectively, we have to, have the same understanding of the audiences we're trying to reach. And one thing we, recognized is that this industry in particular, media advertising or advertising, is devoid of diverse perspectives, especially when we talk about racial or ethnic diversity, and even when we think about other intersectionality, other points of intersectionality, we're devoid of that. And so we can't really truly connect to the audiences we're trying to or we're purporting to do the work on behalf of our clients for. And so that's what really makes it important. But there's three separate pieces to that, right? There's the diversity, right? Let's get different people into the space. And there's the inclusion, and then there's the equity, right? And the equity is really, in my opinion, the most important part, right? We can bring people in all we want, but if it's not an equitable space, right? If it's not a space, first of all, where they feel like they belong, they're not going to stay very long. And the way you feel like you belong is when you start to see that equity play out. Like, what does leadership look like, right? Like, what is, where do the other opportunities for growth lie? Like, how does this organization, apply, the things that they talked about to my everyday experience? And so we are at a point right now that is extremely important to the workforce. And I think the role that HBCUs play in it is important as well, right? HBCUs have held down, the culture for so long, right? And done it in a way, when you compare it to a PWI, they've done it from being under-resourced and still have produced phenomenal professionals, right? Like there's no question. And so I think that the role that HBCUs play in it right now is to continue doing what they've been doing, right? And essentially making themselves even more available to organizations who want to come in and help fill in the gaps. And so I think that that's why DEI is important to the 21st century workforce. And I think that role that HBCU plays in it sits squarely in that, making more opportunities available for us to come in and connect their students who have historically been excluded to these opportunities that they've been historically excluded from.
Thank you for really driving that point and bringing that point up, because I think that it is important. One, I like that you started off by saying that it's been important since the beginning of time, like not just the 21st century, but then beyond that, understanding that HBCUs have played a pivotal role in ensuring, especially people within the Black community, have been able to not only matriculate into their careers, but then beyond that, go on to be trailblazers and really set the tone for how we move forward collectively as a society. I'll head over to Dr. Dennis, and then after that, we'll have Dr. West introduce himself. But Dr. Johnson, can you kind of just share a little bit more about your thoughts about the ways that D&I is important in this century, or just the workforce in general, and the roles that HBCUs play?
Definitely. I think that, just by looking at the research, DEI brings more money to the company and increase sales. You know, I think that companies overall want to be in multiple markets, and I think that by having, you know, a diverse group of employees, you should be able to do that. I also think the cool part about it is that, you know, with HBCUs, they allow us to tell our story. And you want to be able to tell your story. You don't want anybody else to tell your story. And not just, you know, from your history, but even when selling a product, you know, like only I really know how this product affects the people that look like me or come from the communities in which I come from. And it helps having the resources and tools to be able to tell those stories.
Thank you so much, just for also for driving that point. I think that when we think about the concept of preparing the community, I think that that's key. So, you know, opportunities can be here, but are we also prepared for those opportunities? And I think that that's a great point, that, you know, the point of contention, not even a point of contention, but a great point of entry where HBCUs do come in and they are the ones who are educating the students for the workforce. We'll move on to the next question. For Dr. Wes Bellamy, I think that he's working through kind of, you know, I can see and hear you. Okay, everything's fine, perfect. So we'll head over to Dr. Wes Bellamy. If you'd like to kind of introduce yourself and share a little bit more, you know, about why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important and the roles that HBCUs play. And, you know, we'll also, because you have the next question, also how your HBCU experience prepared you for the real world and how you prepare others. So I know that was probably a lot, but I'll kick it over to you. Let's see. Oh, I think that he might be trying to join as well. So if it helps, what I'll do is rearrange the question. So Dr. Stevenson, I'm going to go ahead and put you on the spot next.
Okay.
How can companies help HBCUs prepare students for the workforce?
Well, I think the main thing, and we see this happening, is most institutions have career fairs, and most of these companies connect with the director. They let them know who they are, the kind of student that they're looking for. And in turn, traditionally, many of our classes, coursework in English, public speaking, things of this nature, take time to prepare our students for being able to communicate well, to be able to computate well, because those are the kind of skills that most employers are looking for. And I think what HBCUs have done is reinforce these skills by, in particular, having writing centers, for example, to reinforce writing skills, having math tutoring centers to help reinforce so that our students, again, are able to compete and provide the kinds of skills and skill sets that employers are looking for. And I think beyond that, what's important is once a school gets a reputation in terms of putting out good students, companies will come back. They will create a pipeline. They will create internships so that once students get their foot in the door, they then, upon graduation, will have an opportunity to be employed by these companies.
Thank you so much also for sharing that and that insight. I see that I just got a message, not only from Karen, but also a student. So Dr. Wesson and Mary, people can see you as well. So I think it might just be us on our end who can't hear. So what I'm going to do is, in good faith, ask Mary to introduce herself. Just what you do at Mediabrands. And what we'll do is hope and cross our fingers that everyone can hear except for us. And I'll have someone ping me when you're done speaking. Oh, I love us. We're going to make it work. The students. So Dr. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to our next question. My next question is for Dr. Dennis. I'll ask you the same questions. Why is it important, for companies to prepare HBCU students for the workforce, and what are some effective ways you've seen it kind of play out?
From our perspective of being like that, being the middle ground, in other words, the bridge between the companies and HBCUs, what I've noticed is that, the students are passionate, very interested in working in this field, and sometimes all they need is an opportunity. To answer your question about, whether it's been important is because they deserve a seat at the table because they are consuming the products that are being marketed and being advertised. I'll never look at, there are some things that I buy now. A great example would be when I go to the car and buy a dealership, one of the first things I look for is someone that looks like me to be able to sell me that car. And it also helps to see the people on the commercials or TV or radio, or whatever, who's behind it, advertising and marketing it, who look like me and understand my community, who's pushing it. So that's why I think I think it's important because I want to see that dollar flipped in our community, and I also want to see us, at the table.
Thank you for that. And I'll also, ask the same question, to Jeff. What ways can companies kind of like show up to ensure that HBCUs and the students are prepared?
I think that so I like Dr. Stevenson's suggestion with regards to the career fairs and things like that, but I think we can organizations can go a step further, right? So the thing that we have that is a resource that not only HBCUs but universities don't have, right, is we have professionals doing the jobs that students want to do on a daily basis, right? And so if we're able to utilize that group of professionals to fill in those gaps, that's really where the help comes in, right? So if you think about, some of the things I mentioned earlier, our Breaking Media program, it was born out of, our desire to fill a gap in, not for ourselves, but for the industry. And so take, for instance, what's happening, what we've seen happening firsthand, specifically with Black and Brown students, but Black students being the focus of the day. Many of them know advertising or media, but they don't really know media advertising. When you say advertising to a lot of Black students, including myself when I was in college, we usually, our mind gravitates towards the creative arts fields in it, or towards PR and entertainment communication, not media advertisement, strategy, planning, and placement. And so what we were seeing happening in the industry is companies were showing up at the career fairs, and Black students were coming in, and they were coming in thinking they were going to end up being an art director into the media advertising world. They were coming in with their mindset on what this career was going to look like. And then a year later, they realized, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. They didn't just leave the companies, they left the industry. And so we realized that a large part of what was missing was there was an education gap. And I don't mean an education gap meaning like the degree. I mean understanding what the disciplines are within this realm and how you fit into them, right? So that's why I keep mentioning Breaking Media, but that was our goal, was like, how do we fill that gap? How can we educate this group of people, some who are interested in advertising, others like myself and many other Black people in the industry who knew nothing about media advertising before we fell into it? How can we educate that group, right? And so this has kind of been a Media Brands mission. How do we educate that group of individuals on what the media disciplines are? That it's a fun industry to be in, that the skills you have are enough to have a career in it, that, oh, if you're an accounting major, we have accounting roles. If you're a law, like if you love the law, we have roles for people who love that, right? How can we make that evident to a larger swath of people? So I think that is the role that organizations not only should play, but that we have to play. right? You can diversify all you want, but if you don't prepare that landing pad properly, right, when those students land or those students go from being students to candidates to employees, it's all for naught. And so I think that that's the role that we have to take up, and we have to be proactive in doing it. So I love the question. I just think that there's a lot of work that we all can be doing in that space. And if we're both thinking about it in that way, I think that solutions will come a lot faster.
Can I follow up on that, Nicole?
Yes.
I think one of the kind of buzzwords we emphasize now in our curriculums and at our schools is being interdisciplinary, not necessarily being in a silo with a particular discipline, but as Jeff said, understanding there are so many different skill set components in a particular discipline. So, you know, a lot of students say, I want to be a lawyer, and basically they think about, okay, I'm going to be in the courtroom and I'm going to be defending this particular client, but there are so many different kinds of legal careers. The same thing for a lot of students here at Maryland Eastern Shore. Criminal justice is our largest major. And most of them, they kind of tap into TV and it's CSI and it's 48 hours, but there's so much more within the criminal justice system beyond just those kinds of things that they may see within popular culture. So I think one of the things we're emphasizing at our school and schools in general, HBCUs, is that there are different components in particular disciplines, and particularly when it comes to the media world.
You know, I want to add on to that too. The closest I got to marketing and advertising was, y'all ever seen around tax season when the Liberty tax guy comes and he wears the the Liberty uniform? The Lady Liberty uniform. Yeah. And I remember sitting there and I remember when it first started off and it was just only that costume. And then I never forget, it was like next tax season, somebody added the boombox. And then after that, I saw somebody airbrushing and painting to attract people to the Liberty Tax store. And I used to be like, wow, like this is advertising and marketing, like at its top. And little by little, every year it would evolve. I used to tell myself, like, if only they had a chance or an opportunity so that corporate could see that. And I'm sure it will alter all, the little Liberty Tax stores around the community. But it's things that little, that can really, really make an impact.
Thank you so much just for sharing that. And Dr. West, I can see you, but can we hear you? That's the question.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you.
Yes.
All right. So for Miss Mary, I think you have to press the webinar button on the bottom right, and then that'll send you into the webinar. I think you and I were stuck backstage. So that'll square that away. Very riveting discussion. I appreciate the comments from all of the panelists. My name is Wes Bellamy. I'm the Political Science Department Chair of Virginia State University. I am the former Vice Mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, youngest person ever elected, and I have all three of my degrees from HBCUs, undergrad at South Carolina State University, and my master's and doctorate from Virginia State University. And without HBCUs, I wouldn't be here in any position. So I'm very appreciative, and thank you to Nicole for the invite.
Thank you for that. And Mary, would you also kind of give us an introduction into who you are, what you do, and then we'll kind of pivot backwards and ask you both some questions.
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Look at God. Look at God. He is working. I am Mary Watson, and I am the SVP for inclusion and employee experience at Media Brands. And just a little bit about my background. I have been in human resources for 20 plus years. I don't want to date myself too much and give away my age. And I have come into this industry. I've been in this media industry for now for 4 years. I've spent the bulk of my career in your more traditional type organizations. And I will say, for me, it is a passion point. Even during my interview, one of the things that I really wanted, and the reason why I wanted to join the industry, is because I knew that it's more than just kind of the typical work I would do in developing programs and helping organizations achieve business results through talent management. But you have an opportunity to influence how people see different cultures, how people see different folks, how people craft different organizations, craft a narrative, who they see as their consumers, giving them eye-opening and giving them exposure to data so they won't take for granted that some folks are going to be your consumers just because. So I think it was that Jeff mentioned before, it's more than just the day-to-day work that we're doing. We really are helping to shape the culture. And for me, I graduated both undergrad and grad from Michigan State University. And I am just happy to finally be on screen and being able to share some of my experiences and insights with you all.
Thank you so much for that introduction as well. So what I'll do is I'll pivot backwards. And Mary, I'll start with you. You know, what we were discussing or kind of in conversation about is the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in the 21st century workforce and prior to that, but also how HBCUs play a role in that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's real critical. And I think that, you know, one of the things about an HBCU, you're going to a college in a supportive community. You're going into college and experiencing an environment that's going to look very different than when you go into corporate America. I think HBCUs play a part because for many individuals, they're providing folks with an opportunity to go to college where it might not have existed at a PWI institution. I think it's also getting that grooming and getting that nurturing that's going to set you up for success, not only after you immediately graduate from college, but for your entire lifetime. There's also that very deep credence and credo to reach back and always be connected to your university. You don't always get that beyond homecoming weekend at some organizations. You don't always get that deep feeling and that deep pride with your organization. So I think HBCUs play a critical part. You have great minds and innovation that's coming from HBCUs, and you've seen that throughout history. It's definitely an important piece within, you know, this overall structure that we have.
Thank you for that. I kind of want to pivot backwards and well, actually, let's move forward. I'd like to ask Mary, I know that she just got done speaking, but why is it important for media brands to tackle diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, it's important. As I mentioned, it's not just about the work that we're doing within our four walls, but we're having an opportunity to influence how different cultures, how different individuals are being viewed on a global landscape. And so the work that we're doing is imperative that we have diverse voices so they understand diverse perspectives. It's important to see people, you know, when you see yourself, it makes you feel like you're being seen and heard. And it's also, you know, there's been a lot of research around there being a business reason for organizations to be diverse and to think about inclusion. It's just basic common sense. These are basic common sense principles we learned by the time we were in third grade, is to treat people with respect, to make sure people have a voice. Even though if we don't agree with a person or don't understand a person, we should still be respectful. So I mean, there really isn't a business reason. You don't need a business reason to treat people with respect and to see people. The fact that we feel like we have to justify being diverse and being inclusive because it's going to impact the bottom line, I think that's the wrong frame of mind, to be quite honest with you. It's the right thing to do, and we should do the right thing. And for media brands specifically, we have always had an approach and a strategy around diversity and inclusion. And I think, you know, for a lot of organizations, after 2020 with the George Floyd murder, I think you have a lot of organizations that decided to be woke, right? And I think you had a lot of organizations, because of social media, have implemented things and strategies because they don't want to be called out on social media. But one of the things that I can say about media brands and IPG, we recognize that there is a gap in bringing in diverse talent. It has been that way since the beginning of the ad industry. We've been very intentional about the things that we're doing and making sure that we're just not being performative, but we are making an impact.
Nicole, can I add a very short point on to what Mary was saying? And
Of course.
Mary and I talk every week, actually. So another, and I agree with that. You know, the business reason I think bothers me. We'll give you one if you need it, but you shouldn't need it. The real reason, right, is because if we really think about stereotypes and as how they exist, not only against our community, but every community, they were mostly perpetuated through communications, right? Like, so we did a lot of this industry, advertising and communication, did a lot of the damage that exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we perpetuated those messages. So that's why we should be doing it. That's why it's important to us, because that same power we wielded then, we still wield that same power. So it's really important for us to get out and start communicating the right way that people should be viewed in all of their unique glory. And I think that that's another reason why, Media Brands is, we've been on this journey for some time now. It's just now we're starting to make it more known outwardly because we feel like we've prepared that landing pad. But the reason is we were a prime, contributor to how people around the world think about Black people or African Americans or Hispanics and Latinos, like Asian. Like we were a prime contributor, and so that's what makes it extremely important.
When you say contributor, what do you mean? Like in a negative way or positive way? Help me.
Thanks for making me clarify. In a negative way, right? If you think about advertisements back in the day, right, you would see a Black child with big lips eating a watermelon to advertise whatever the product was, right? You think about the minstrel shows, like all of those things, all of that was some form of communication that came through the advertising, marketing, communications industries. And that's how people around the world learn whatever. And obviously media goes beyond that, right? There's other forms of media, news media and things like that. But that messaging travels the world. And then people on one side of the world who've never seen you, Dr. Bellamy, or never seen Dr. Stevenson or Dr. Johnson or any of the other, they have a way that they're now thinking of us because that's how we've been portrayed. Yeah. And this industry was a prime contributor.
Yeah, I think those are all byproducts of white supremacy. And that's one of the reasons why HBCUs are so important, especially those that were created for us and taught by us, i.e. Virginia State University. And I think we have to be clear in the distinction that there were HBCUs that were founded by white folk and also taught by white folk to indoctrinate Black folk into a way of thinking and following white supremacist ideology, which in turn has a negative impact and negative connotations within our own, which leads to us believing that we have to act a certain way, dress a certain way, enunciate our words a certain way, and so forth. So I think there's a direct correlation between those things and instances and advertising in terms of, we have to be clear, many of the advertising practices in which we've seen, in which you just described, Brother Jeff, was really rooted and based in white supremacy. So, the fact in which these images are the most prevalent is because those are the images in which the quote unquote majority would like for us to believe not only about ourselves, but those are the images that are readily consumed across the world for that matter. But I think it's important, again, like advertisement is just one industry. The overall theme, which pushes these characters, that pushes these notions, is white supremacy. So let's not make any, not saying you're doing that. I just think it's important for us to add that caveat that that's the driving force. And that's what we're often trying to combat within our communities. And I think in all of our avenues.
I think it's important to point out we are at a critical moment in our nation's history. On the one hand, HBCUs have been given as much exposure as we ever have. We have a vice president who's from an HBCU. We have Jeff Bezos' former wife who's given millions and millions to HBCUs. So now is our time. But at the same time, we have the debate over critical race theory. We have all of this pushback that's going on now. And I think it's important for HBCUs, again, to step up to the next level to fight back against this racial reaction that's taking place in our country. And so I think at each institution, many of them now, before, but especially after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, have created like social justice initiatives and centers that are at the heart of this pushback. And so I think it's critical to engage our students to understand the struggle's real and the struggle is not over.
Thank you all for that robust engagement and discourse. I think that it always is important to name the cause, So I like that we always start with understanding that white supremacy does have everything to do with the ways the perceptions that people have of our community, our abilities, what we're able to accomplish. But I think that, I think one of the things when I think about being proud about being an HBCU, a product of an HBCU, a daughter of an HBCU is the concept that we're learning how to not only deconstruct that in a way, but also in a way just create something new. I think that that's something that's beautiful. What we see in our day-to-day. So when we visit HBCUs, we see students' minds, they're woke, like they're awake. They're asking those questions. I know in our past session, past workshop that we just hosted, a student said, representation matters, because everyone isn't white in the world. Like that's the why, we shouldn't have to just work at a company because, they're just here. Like, we should be valued. And I think that I love that about the HBCUs now. When we're talking to students, their question, like, I don't know about that company, like, we love that they also have that kind of autonomy to say, I think that maybe not working at Google right now for me isn't the best bet. I always bring them up. We don't talk about Google, but it's important for students just to navigate through that. I like that Encanto reference. But what I'll do is head to my next question. My next question, I'll pitch it over to Dr. Johnson first, but how do we create a more equitable workforce? So I know that you lead a lot of the partnerships that we have at HBCU 20 by 20 and really work to facilitate those, but how is that contributing to a more equitable workforce?
I think what we're doing now is a great example by having the conversation and making sure that, multiple parties represent multiple different industries, and the HBCU community are present in the room. And I think that, from things like this, that's when HBCU 20 by 20 comes in, because we can help build those pipelines. So we can make sure, for example, people like Jeff and Mary are in the room, in the HBCU classroom, or have a say-so in what that curriculum may look like or what that internship may look like. Therefore, when it's time for the students to actually graduate, they have some type of opportunity that's available for them. And it's not only, this is what your resume and cover letter should look like, but this is how you navigate the industry. These are some of the mistakes that I made, and these are some of the things you can do to avoid it. But it's also having, the professors and deans there as well, letting them know this is the history of this industry, and you have to avoid these potholes, because if you don't, history will repeat itself.
Very good.
For sharing that. I'll ask the same question to Dr. Wes. How do we create a more equitable workforce? And also how are students' minds in the classrooms being shaped to also help to go on to create a more equitable workforce?
Well, I think we have to understand, one, that Black folk aren't a monolithic group, and even our students aren't monolithic. So the way in which they develop and consume information is going to be different based off of not only their experiences, but also where they are in their lives. So I think that being patient with them is of the utmost importance. And I try to reinforce to my students, as well as those who are in my department, the professors that are under me, that we have to remain patient with all of our students, but impatient with progress. So we're going to be patient in terms of helping them grow to get to where they need to be, but we're going to be impatient in terms of how we're pushing ideas and how we need to move forward. So when it comes to consumption, I think many of them learn information on social media, and then it's our job as professors to be able to be engaging with them. As you all can hear my 2-year-old calling for me. Yes, honey, let daddy finish talking, and then I will come right back. So we engage with them to create lessons, if you will, that are somewhat entertaining. I think we have to be honest. The way in which we teach needs to be entertaining, because they kind of come from that world right now. We have to engage them in a way that speaks to their love language, if you will, but also create content, if you will, that's relevant. And I think sometimes there are issues with more traditionalists in terms of closing that gap, if you will. And we have to be willing to push those barriers to create lanes, if you will, that's going to allow our students to consume this information, to allow them to then go out and be the change that we're looking to see. And the last thing that I'll just say or add is that we can't afraid to be bold. And I know that I have a level of privilege at my campus because my president, my provost, they all allow me to be able to go and be me. I'm an activist at heart, an organizer at heart, and former elected. I'm more of a practitioner than a researcher. So from my vantage point, I'm much more talking about what are the things in which we can do on the ground immediately and taking very practical steps, opposed to kind of looking at research and theory. Different folks have different strokes. So we just need to, again, keep that in mind when we're teaching our students, but be open-minded to all.
Thank you for that. And I think that what I really valued out of everything that you said is that piece about being patient. I think that what we even find with HBCU 20 by 20 is us really wanting to make sure that everyone has what they need, but then beyond that, having them tell us what they need. So oftentimes, companies may come in and say, like, you need X, Y, and Z, you have to do X, Y, and Z without asking students what they actually need. And I think that that's a big piece of the conversation that tends to be left out, is really understanding what their thoughts, what their needs are as well. So I like the being patient, but then on the opposite end, being impatient and pushing them also just to explore what else is out there too. I'll ask Dr. Marshall, what are some of your thoughts on how we work to create a more equitable workforce?
Do you want Jeff or do you want me? We both are Marshalls.
Oh, Dr. Stevenson.
Okay. As I said before, the struggle continues. I think we have to be at the table. We have to continue to advocate for ourselves. We have to, from our own perspective, put out a message of why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. I think we have to engage employers, again, to let them know that students from HBCUs are just as qualified as any other student, and that they will make major contributions and take these companies to another level and introduce them and be able to put out certain kinds of perspectives that perhaps have not been there before. And so this is a work in progress. And I think, again, it's that moment where graduates from HBCUs can really impact companies, major companies that are out there, and educate them on the kind of talents that they have that will better represent the products, whatever that product may be, and diversify and expand their audience and their consumer base.
Thank you also for just providing that insight. I think that as we push forward, a lot of it is getting companies to understand the value of HBCUs. I know that I'd say maybe less than 10 years ago, people kind of like were popping around the question, are HBCUs relevant? I remember that being a question that really bothered me. I'm like, how else do we build without the HBCUs? Like this was honestly our stepping stone in this country, at least. So I appreciate that. But then also, like I said, it's companies realizing, one, that there's not just 1, 2, or 3 HBCUs, that there are more than 100 HBCUs that students attend, that they're hidden gems at all of those HBCUs. So I think that that's something that's important to HBCU 20 by 20, is that raising awareness piece about, not only the relevancy and the talent that exists at HBCUs, but just how impactful HBCUs have been to this nation's history, just as in general. I want to move over to Mary and ask her, what does creating an equitable workforce look like for you?
Yeah. And so I think, it goes back into, those lessons we learned by the time we were third grade, or should have learned by the time we were in third grade. And it really is looking at respecting people, and respecting people looks, that it's bottom line. I mean, there isn't a gray area around that. I think from an organizational perspective, in creating equity, again, it's about being very intentional. And so within our organization, we wanted to make sure it was very clear that everyone understood the words that were coming out of our mouths, what we meant by creating equity. We created a very intentional strategy around this is what equity looks like. We have an equity statement. And this equity statement was developed by employees by going through and looking at our data to understand what are those circumstances and those situations where we need to further develop within our organization. We also realized that we needed to have a common language, right? Because for some individuals, when you start the conversation around diversity and equity, the first thing they go to is, I'm not a racist, so this doesn't apply to me, but there's no action on my part. We needed to make sure that there was a common language, that it was understood. We have a global learning program and learning journey for everyone across all levels within our organization. And these are not your traditional, don't be mean to a Black person type training, not your typical microaggressions with our annual harassment type training. But these are those conversations that people are having where they're unbraiding and having conversations about the way that they were raised and feeling comfortable to talk about situations that they have encountered in their upbringing and then how that manifests itself in the workplace. We are very intentional about each region within each country developing what are your inclusion and your diversity goals? What are your representation goals? We have them for the United States in every single region. And it's very specific to that particular region globally. We looked at what is the group that when we look across all of the different data points, what's the group that has the least amount of confidence in their career trajectory? What is the group that when you look at where we are from a just general population perspective, where there seems to be some inequity there? If in the United States, it's Black talent. We also are very intentional about having an inclusion goal. And inclusion, again, is beyond Black and brown boy and girl, but it is also looking at all of those individuals who feel like they have been historically excluded in our industry. And there's a complete blend of that. And it gets to the work that Magna is doing and looking at those different social identity groups that we belong to and how important they are. It was also very important that we have accountability. So all of our leaders, their variable pay is impacted by how they're able to achieve their diversity goals. And you will have a lot of companies that will say that they're doing things, and they'll be very proud in putting out the percentage of different demographics they have. Our folks, our leaders understand that this is going to impact the bottom line. So if nothing else, if you want your money to come in the way that you think it should be coming in, you need to make sure that you're being held accountable for your inclusion and your representation goals. We also have DEI leads in different committees across all of our agencies. We also have been very forthcoming around, you need to have a strategy. What are the strategies that you're looking at? What are the things that you're doing? Not just the typical things that everyone under the sun is doing, but what are those things that are unique to your agency that are going to help propel you further? This is a journey. It is not a flash in the pan. It is something that historically we will always work on diversity and equity because people are human and humans have this ability to treat people unfairly. So this is not just something that we're doing that's popular since 2020. It's something that we will continue on. It's a shame that you do have to. There's sometimes you just wonder, like, who raised you? Why do we even have to say these things to each other? But we know the society that we live in, and those are all things that we're doing to be very intentional about equity and inclusion.
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
no, I thought you weren't on it. Go ahead. You're back. You're good. You're good.
No worries, no worries. That was a lot. It was almost like we just got a real sermon on like what companies really need to do, how we really move forward. Like, I think we did say honest, upfront, transparent, real solution. So thank you, Mary, for that. I'm going to go to Jeff and ask you the same question. And then afterwards, we'll kind of wrap it up with one last question. But Jeff, how do we create a more equitable workforce?
Kind of hard to follow Pastor Mary in that Easter sermon, but I think I think the only other thing is, and Mary touched on it. It really, for us, for the Black community in particular, this is about equitable workplaces are really about opportunity, right? Like you want to be afforded, you produce at work, you want to be afforded the same opportunities that your other counterparts are being afforded. And I think that equitable workforces, in order to create that, you have to be intentional about making sure those opportunities are available, right? So it's one thing for us to come and partner with HBCU 20 by 20 or go out to any of your universities and recruit young people to come in. And it's another thing for us to make sure that those people we already have within our four walls are getting the opportunities to advance, right? So that when we do invite your young people in, they see people that look like them who have advanced through the ranks and they recognize, oh, there is opportunity here for me. So I think that in trying to be brief and not retread anything that's already been said, I think that that's probably one of the most important, things around creating an equitable workplace. And so, and Mary spearheaded a lot of the work that we've done across media brands from a talent perspective on injecting equity into the system. But that was one of them. It was like, hey, let's really understand who we already have here, what their career goals are, not what we think they are based on the role they currently have, but what is it you want from your career? How can we help in that? And that in turn allows us to retain some of that talent. They move up or over, or however it is they see that their career going. And then when young people come in, they get that sense of belonging that we feel is really important. And so that's how I would hope that we are creating these equitable workplaces.
Can I add one point, Nicole?
Yes, of course.
I agree wholeheartedly with what Brother Jeff said, but I think there's another point to this. Oftentimes we ask ourselves, what can we do in terms of creating a more equitable space, but we're not the ones enforcing equity. Like more times than not is white folk who have created these systems, who we're trying to get them to understand why equity is important. I think this is a question that we often need to ask our white brothers and sisters. Like, why are you refusing to create equitable spaces? And honestly, we need to ask ourselves as well, do we want to partake in those spaces that are not welcoming to us? Like I intentionally got 3 of my degrees from HBCUs because I refused to give my money or my resources to those who didn't always value me. And I choose to teach at an HBCU. And again, I choose to serve at a HBCU because I refuse to give my brain power to those who haven't, again, always valued us or still in many ways have to be forced to show value towards us. So there's a premise around all of this in which I think we need to think about how do we get back to essentially valuing each other, uplifting each other, empowering each other. And even if it means that, like, this may not be what some people want to hear, but my grandma always told me, white folk are going to white folk. And I firmly believe that. So us looking for them to do right by us, I don't think is always the right thing. We can hope, we can push, we can ask for policy, but the overarching theme needs to be us taking care of ourselves, controlling ourselves, empowering ourselves, doing what we must do for ourselves, loving ourselves, being patient with ourselves. And I think as we continue to do that, because we are doing it, so as we continue to do that, then we'll see others value us in the same way, hopefully. And if they don't, then that's on them. But we're going to do what we have to do for us.
So I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think the way Nicole phrased that question and my being in a role, in a C-level role at a company as the accountability partner to the CEO, right? Like when she asked we, I'm going to speak as we, right, as that company. And so I, again, agree. And this is an interesting dynamic, right, that not only me, but other, traditionally or historically marginalized groups have when they sit in some of these roles of being the accountability partner. There is a dynamic there where you're like, wait, I'm trying to help fix a problem. One, my community did not cause, and two, that I am personally impacted by. But because of the way you phrase that question, and because that's one of the reasons we're here,
right?
So I want to make sure, like, I'm answering the we on behalf of UM, and right. And so if my CEO or global CEO, who both happen to be white, who I talk to on a regular basis about this work that we're trying to do and that we're pushing forward, and I love the way you phrased it earlier about being impatient, like that. That is extremely important. So it's my goal to make sure we're impatient with where we're at. And so when I say how can we create it, I'm speaking for that company, right? Yeah. So
I think it's important to make no mistake about it. Individuals like yourselves are incredibly important because we need persons to be able to advocate on our behalves in those spaces. I just think there's I think, and I apologize if I framed this in an incorrect way, it doesn't have to be either or. I think there is a multi-plane approach for us to get to the same destination, because there are multiple people who want to ride one plane and there's others who need to get on the other. And because of such, because there are multimodal means of transportation, some people need to ride the train, some people are going to drive, some people are going to fly, some people are going to jog. I like running marathons, some people are going to run. We're all going to get to that finish line, but how we do so is going to be predicated on your comfort level, if you will. I think from my vantage point, it's more so with us not being ashamed of us going how we need to go, when we need to go for ourselves. But also it is important for us to have brothers like Jeff who are advocating for us in those other spaces. So yeah, we're on the same page, bro, and I appreciate you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for that. We really, really appreciate that. I think that this was one of the things we really, really wanted to come out of this event. To not only hear both sides, but to honestly see that intersectionality point. But thank you so much on behalf of HBCU 20 by 20 and Media Brands. Like, I think this has been the greatest conversation so far. I really enjoyed this and pulled away a lot of jewels. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave it on to you, Nicole, because I know we're at 3:00 now.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to the panelists as a call comes in. Sorry. I want to say thank you to the panelists. I think that this was a very nuanced conversation. I think that where I sit as CEO of HBCU 20 by 20, we get to do this, right? Like, we get to say, you can't fire Black women from companies for no reason and think that it's okay to partner with us, right? So that's where I said, we don't talk about Google. You know, we will cancel partnerships if we don't think that it honors the community that we serve. And I think that we're at a point where we understand that no company has it perfectly together. Everyone's still working through it, especially because we know that there are systems that have been in place, you know, in trying to not only dismantle those systems, but create a new world. That's why, you know, I always say, what does an equitable world look like? I don't think it exists now. I don't know if it exists, if it will exist in this next generation coming up. So I don't know if my future kids, whenever I have them, will walk into a more equitable world. But what I do know is that hosting these kind of conversations where we get to hear from chairs and deans and people who are in C-suite. So, you know, it helps us move the conversation forward in a way that's intentional, where we can learn. But then beyond that, I like the practitioner piece, how we move forward to ensure that we're putting these things into practice so that we don't have to keep recreating everything that we've seen. So with that being said, I want to thank Jeff, Dr. Johnson, Mary, Dr. Bellamy, and Dr. Stevenson just for joining us today for this conversation. The conversation isn't over. It's always going to continue, but we appreciate you just for taking the time out to speak with us today. I know that next we're moving into the shoot your shot section. So for those in the lobby, you'll be kind of like prepped into how this works, but this is a direct opportunity for you to engage with recruiters and hiring managers at Media Brands and its agencies to learn more about the roles that are available, the roles that will become available, understanding more about programs like the Breaking in the Media. All of me wants to say Breaking Bad, but Breaking in the Media program. But thank you so much again. For those tuning in, go ahead and join the lobby and we'll see you soon again.